me on planning, development, and transportation for the Boston City Council. I am not joined by any colleagues yet, but I'm sure some will come. I'm very honored to have our Chief of Streets here to tell us about two grants that were sponsored by the mayor and referred to the committee. Docket number 0174 as of January 16th of this year, and docket number 0447 on March 6th. I want to remind everyone that this public hearing is being recorded and broadcast live. It'll be on channels Comcast 8, RCN 82, and Verizon 1964, and webcast streaming online at the City of Boston website. So please silence your cell phones and other devices, and we will take public testimony if anyone is interested in signing in to testify. So now I will read the dockets into the record, and then we can dive right into discussion. Docket number 0174, message and order authorizing the City of Boston to accept and expend a grant from the Boston Planning and Development Agency in an amount not to exceed $1,502,052 for the cost related to the design and construction of the Harrison Avenue Complete Street Corridor project. And docket number 0447, message and order authorizing the City of Boston to accept and expend the amount of $200,000 in the form of a grant awarded by MCAF Winthrop, LLC, pursuant to the 115 Winthrop Square Redevelopment Project Cooperation Agreement. The purpose of this grant is to fund a bus rapid transit plan as described in the project's Transportation Access Plan Agreement. Okay, so thank you, Chief. Why don't we just dive right in, starting with the Harrison Ave grant, and then we can do any questions on that one and then move to the other.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Councilor. I'm also joined stage right by Bill Conroy, who's in many ways we're actually talking about his good work here this afternoon. So Harrison Avenue is, as you mentioned, a $1.5 million accept and expend for the Boston Transportation Department to put in place the Complete Streets plan for a section of Harrison Ave, essentially going from Harold Street to East Berkeley Street. Back in roughly 2011, 2012, with the ink block developments coming online, there was essentially a common plan created for that streetscape corridor, which each of the developments along that corridor have been designing as they do their projects, so better sidewalks, improved furnishing zone, and then this money combined with some city capital funds is essentially to redo the street bed itself. So I know you know the area well, basically removing the median from the middle of that street bed, putting in parking protected bike lanes on both sides, some parking, a lane of travel, and a pocket left turn lane is essentially the design. The actual construction will start once most of the development has occurred on both sides, just so that we aren't tearing things back up after we do them. So we're probably looking at a winter, sometime around the end of 2020, beginning of 2021, actual reconstruction for the road bed section itself. Again, much of the sort of the streetscape sidewalk components are actually already in place when the projects are done or in development right now. There's a separate section of this money which actually is devoted to much more of a sort of two circulation improvements immediately to the west, one on Traveler Street, one on Washington Street. There has been long interest in having simply from Harold to East Berkeley for Washington to be two-way, so a dedicated bus lane in each direction and a general travel lane, a dedicated bus bike lane in each direction, and a general travel lane. That would be put in place, and that actually would likely go into construction in 2019, so this year, and then Traveler Street, which simply connects the two, would also have a two-way component. So essentially, these are two things that helps build out the circulation system, given some of the new developments coming online.
Okay, great. Thank you so much. So, okay, I'll start piece by piece.
Yeah.
Winter 2020 or beginning 2021, which developments are you waiting for to finish?
Quinzani's, I believe, is the last one, and Bill can, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yep. So many of the other ones, like a lot of those developments are already in place,
yeah.
but that's the principal one that we're waiting on.
Got it. Okay. And then, so basically all of the existing kind of curb cuts or entries to the, you know, either the Whole Foods or other places
exactly.
are set already. I mean, and so, I mean, given, I haven't been lately, but had heard, at least for a while, the
yep.
backup, given, you know,
yep.
particularly certain times of the week.
Yes.
Will this alleviate any of that?
This should, I think in particular, actually the Harrison and Traveler pieces will actually just improve circulation in that area a little bit better. The pieces, the biggest transformation sort of really design transformation that'll happen with the Harrison Ave piece is that median removal, which allows for the parking protected lanes on both, bike lanes on both sides. The overall circulation pattern should improve, and there'll be we spent a lot of time, Bill spent a lot of time figuring out how do we actually make sure that there's good sight lines into and out of things like the Whole Foods surface parking lot. So we've been sort of mindful of that to make sure that the general circulation in the area is improved, with particularly an eye on improving circulation for pedestrians and folks on bikes.
Got it. Wonderful. I knew I would have company. Thank you, Councilor O'Malley. Welcome. So the protected bike lanes will go at the next to the sidewalk and then parked cars?
Exactly right.
Okay.
It's a 5-foot bike lane, 3-foot buffer, flex posts, parked cars.
Okay.
And then a travel lane in each direction on Harrison with pocket left turns.
Okay, so we started with the 0174 first. Okay, and let me just think. So are you changing any of the streetlights or anything?
So
signaling?
with this, it's only the signalization sort of throughout that corridor will be sort of reviewed and improved. That is, I don't know if that's a component of this funding. Actually, Bill will likely know. Is that we?
So the streetlights right now are in the median, but the streetlights have already been installed on the other letters.
Sorry, traffic signals though, you mean, not streetlights?
Oh, sorry, yes, yeah.
Traffic signals,
Yeah.
yes.
Yes,
Sorry.
The traffic lights that are currently there will be replaced with new lights.
Okay, so just for, I know Juan's coming to make sure everything is on the record. So just to reiterate, the traffic lights, the street lights kind of illuminating the street are in the median, will be moved to the sides?
Exactly. They, in fact, actually, with the streetscape design already are. So in some ways, we're just taking out the median and the
Yep.
lights, which will be redundant by the time the streetscape improvements are done. And then the traffic signals are going to be redone as part of the corridor project. Is that a fair summary, Bill?
Correct.
Yeah.
So, and in terms of redone with the corridor project, more opportunity for residents to comment or just to kind of time it given what happens with moving to two-way parallel to there or?
Well, the two-way Washington Street with the two-way traveler, we've already held a public meeting on that. So that was just one of those things we were eager to get it off the ground. And since we've gotten it off the ground, I mean, the neighborhood's just biting at the bit to get this thing out there. So we're doing everything in our power to get it out there this spring, summer. That being said, with Harrison Ave, we'll probably have another public meeting just before we go ahead and put everything in place. Because obviously the design was done a while ago, and we just want to dust it off and make sure we get some fresh eyes from the community and make sure we get the right input in that before we go ahead and actually build it.
When was it last designed, or when was the last?
The
Public
last
meeting.
iteration of the design was done in, say, 2016,
Okay,
okay? So, you know, a lot of things have changed, and with the standards of bike lanes and
Exactly.
such. So,
I mean, the principal change, correct me if I'm wrong, in
Yeah.
2016, the original 2012-ish design was bike lanes sort of essentially adjacent to the main travel lane. In 2016, we shifted those to parking protected. But to Bill's point, we'll have a chance to kind of take one more look at that. The thing which will be difficult would be actually moving the curb. The curb is really going to be set, so it's this money is really about what do we do with the asphalt that's curb to curb
yeah,
that we'll have left over.
okay. When will that public meeting be, in case I get questions?
I would say, once we get this project, the North Washington Street project out the door, then we'll probably start to dust off the plans for Harrison. And with the scheduling, as the chief said, somewhere around late 2020 or 2021. So I would say we'd probably have a meeting, say, fair to say next year, probably early next year in 2020.
Okay. Okay, great. Let me see if there's any other questions on this piece. So you said from Harold Street to East Berkeley, any issues around that you'll need to engage residents, maybe particularly thinking about some of the, multilingual residents there about, impacts during the construction or?
I think the more disruptive of the two, most of the Washington Traveler stuff is basically lane markings and signals. Harrison will definitely be a major construction job, just for the removal of the median, so that's going to be much more of a community engagement process. There are some, thinking of Councilor Flynn's district. I guess this entirely is in Councilor Flynn's district. But as part of our bike network, we're also thinking about how do we actually take this across, sort of north across the Pike, sort of on Harrison Ave, and how do we sort of continue these bike facilities? And then similarly, how do we connect them to the South Bay Harbor Trail at the southern end? And those are sort of the two links that our active transportation team is looking at.
Okay. Councilor Flynn, I was just channeling you for a moment, making sure that I was asking about our multilingual outreach to residents who speak Chinese and Spanish there with this Harrison Ave reconstruction project. Okay, one last question from me, and then I'll pass it to colleagues. In terms of removing the median, and then what that means for pedestrian cross times and how that will happen, how will the pedestrian experience change?
So it is a longer crossing. But it is a lane. It's basically a lane and a turn lane plus the bike lane. There are bump outs on some of the intersections, not all of the intersections along that Harrison Ave corridor. So that is the principal difference. The overall feel, though, of where Harrison Ave was in 2011 versus where it will be, frankly, even now, but in 2021 or 2022, it will feel much more like a pedestrian-friendly boulevard than it does feel like a broad expanse of asphalt that it was exactly. So,
okay. And so is there opportunity, so there will be the push buttons and crosswalks and that will actually work?
Absolutely. Everything will be, the current standards that we use now.
Okay. Councilor O'Malley, any questions on this project? Then we'll move to the other.
No questions. Just a comment. Thank you, Bill. Thank you, Chris, for your great work. Obviously, this is something that is ought to be very celebratory. It's great to sort of see these changes. I know this area well. I can remember how different that sort of section, Herald Square, has changed since growing up to now, and this is absolutely going to make it more friendly and accessible for folks on all modes of transportation as well as walking. So I think it's really exciting. I guess I'm more curious, and I was a little bit late, so I apologize if you went over this. This $1.5 million is coming from the BPDA. Is this tied to a project that's then being sort of run through the city, or?
It's tied to 5 separate projects, and again, really credit to Bill on this. One of the things which we have done here, and as well as on Boylston Street and the Fenway, and there are other areas where we were looking to do this, rather than have each development focus on a specific project, it is multiple developments focus on a common project.
Smart.
And so there are 5 projects that Bill sort of negotiated to basically collectively bring that financing in to do this sort of whole complete street.
That's great. That's great. That's a much more effective model. Simple economics, leveraging sort of money and resources by looking at things more holistically is going to be a heck of a lot more impactful than sort of a piecemeal bike rack here or light moved here. So this is great. Well done, gentlemen. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Councilor O'Malley. Councilor Flynn.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you to you and to Councilor O'Malley for the important work you're doing on this issue. And I just want to say thank you to Bill and Chris and your team as well for working with residents across the city to make sure that our streets are as safe and accessible as we possibly can make them. That's probably the #1 issue I've been focused on since I started, is making sure pedestrian safety is always factored in as we do construction or infrastructure improvements on any streets or sidewalks. I do apologize that I arrived late, but could you briefly give me a little bit of background on the project as it relates to pedestrian safety issues or concerns?
So I can start, and Bill, feel free to add to this. So where we started in sort of 2011 was with a sort of a broad street that had much more of as one of the councilors said, I think sort of more of an industrial characteristic for that block stretch between Herald and East Berkeley. The intent was, how do we transform that to something which is more pedestrian and bike friendly? So what this would do, what's already happening on that corridor, reconstruction of the sidewalks, implementation of sort of a furnishing zone with street trees, decorative pavers that allow for better drainage, addition of things like bike racks. The principal change that this money would allow is for us to remove that median that exists, the sort of concrete median that exists, which would allow us to actually shift to add parking protected bike lanes against both curb lines, going in both directions, and have essentially a row of parking, a lane of parking, a lane of travel, pocket left turn lanes where needed on both sides. Our intent here is really to do what is all of our constituents said is our top priority within Go Boston 2030, make these sort of Main Street business district areas feel more ped and bike friendly and be more ped and bike friendly, and this simply allows us to do that. Anything you'd add, Bill?
No, that's well said.
Do you know, as it relates to the students in the downtown area or the Chinatown area or the South End area that are walking to school from those neighborhoods to the Josiah Quincy School, are we able to factor in the time these students go to school, walking to school with ensuring that the lights remain on, giving the kids more of an opportunity to cross the street with more time,
really interesting.
knowing that they're going to be crossing those streets from 6:30 in the morning till 7:30 in the morning, and when they get out of school at 2 in the afternoon to 3 in the afternoon, but just to make it a little bit more safer for those young kids.
Really that is, if we are not already considering that in the signalization, we will make sure that we do. That's a great point.
Right.
Certainly, things like leading pedestrian intervals and longer walk times are things which this will certainly allow and facilitate, but that connection to some of the schools like the Quincy, I think, is something which is interesting for us to make sure that we're focusing on.
Okay, and my final question, again, I just want to say thank you for this important work, but what is some of the, when you're doing pedestrian safety in infrastructure improvements, is there also a component of public education to inform the public not only of what you're doing, but what steps the public can take to make it safer for them and for their families as well?
That is something which is, as you know, sort of great interest to the mayor, and the way in which we're going to get to safe streets, as we all, this is something which the five of us have talked about many times. It is about engineering, but it's also about enforcement and education. I think there are things that we can do, whether it's signs around speeding or sort of outreach over a variety of different methods that we can do to make sure that no matter how you're getting around, that you're participating in making our city much safer. That is something which the mayor has asked us to focus more on over the course of this calendar year, and we'll be doing some more education and outreach around road safety. One of the things that'll be coming up is a new round of Boston's Safest Driver, which is one way in which we have approached this in the past, which is essentially a competition to help inform all of our behaviors as we are driving on city streets.
Thank you, Chief. I appreciate that. Appreciate your hard work. And as you do continue the outreach to the community, and especially the community along in Chinatown, I know you do communicate in Cantonese and Mandarin to the residents. So I just want to acknowledge that and appreciate you ensuring that those residents that may not speak English, that they're also heard in this process, and their opinions are also weighed in and factored in, and that language access that the city has done very well on is an important issue to me. I know it's an important issue to the mayor as well, but that's something I hope we will continue to do as we move forward. And thank you to the chair, and thank you to Councilor O'Malley as well.
Thank you, Councilor Flynn. So finally, just to wrap up this grant, could you just give we talked about a bunch of different pieces that will happen with it. So what is the breakdown of how the 1.5 million will be used?
Roughly $700,000 for Washington Traveler.
Correct.
The balance for Harrison plus city funding for Harrison.
How much city funding?
3
million.
And one note back to the pedestrian crossing time, and Bill, correct me if I'm wrong, there are places where at the crossings we are going to try to preserve some of the medians, and I think we have some opportunity to actually ensure that we are consequently can reduce the crossing distance a little bit and provide sort of a mid sort of crosswalk protection.
Okay. Could you send over the last version, the 2016 version of the design, just so we have it? Okay, great.
Absolutely.
Perfect. Thank you.
It'll have some scribbles on it. But,
Perfect. Okay, thank you very much.
I can send it to you electronically if you
Yeah,
want
I'll
to.
take both. That would be
Okay,
great.
I can scan it and send it to you if you want to do that.
Thank you.
Okay.
And, okay, so moving on to docket 0447, from the Winthrop Square Garage Project, Could you outline this?
So as part of the Winthrop Square Garage TAPA, Transportation Access Plan Agreement, there were a set of transportation-related funding commitments. One of those is this $200,000, which allows us to advance planning really focused on North Station to South Boston waterfront, essentially, and South Boston bus connections. This essentially will go in parallel with an existing effort, which we've had some conversations about, which is the South Boston waterfront strategic transit plan. This is an ongoing effort between the BPDA and BTD to figure out what the right transit corridors are essentially within the South Boston waterfront. This essentially allows some funding for us to have a parallel and aligned effort to make sure we're looking at corridors like Congress or other streets in our downtown core to think about how we're bringing buses through the downtown core better. This would likely go out to bid for a consultant shortly, with that work happening over the course of this year. The South Boston work is basically, our intent is to have a plan finished or in draft form by the end of this calendar year, so I would expect something of somewhat of a similar timeline here, maybe going into 2020.
And so what exactly will the plan be?
Yeah, so it looks at sort of what the current trip patterns are for MBTA buses as well as shuttles, essentially the desire lines between North Station, downtown points, and the South Boston waterfront, and would figure out what are the ways we can actually enhance those. What are the right routes? What are the right streets they should be on? What are the improvements to those streets that would make sense? There's been some good ongoing conversations between MassDOT through the Better Bus Working Group, BTD and the BPDA to sort of plan for this. This just allows us to have a partner come on board who can really accelerate that planning effort.
Okay, and what is the public engagement piece of it?
So tied in with, and Vinita's not here, Bill I'm sure can also speak to this, but as part of our overall sort of South Boston and downtown effort, there is we're going to sort of use that Better Bus platform to reach out to stakeholders to get their opinions about where are the pain points today, what should actually be better tomorrow, what are some improved routes or treatments on existing routes that we should actually be putting in place.
Okay, so sorry, I didn't ask it the right way. So for example, how many public meetings do you anticipate over the course of the year?
Yeah, I will get back to that because I think Vinita is sort of sketching that out, and Vinita and Matt probably are sketching that out, but I don't want to
Okay, and the consultant, once they come on board, will probably have some proposal for that.
Yep.
Okay, and is this tied, so is this, where do the gondolas fit in with this? Because I know there was some commitment to explore that.
So as part of the other piece, the companion piece, the South Boston Waterfront Strategic Plan, one of the charges for that group is to look at all forms of mass transit, including aerial forms of mass transit. So that is a piece which they are considering. That's separate, actually, from this.
Great.
This is really a downtown.
Okay,
focus.
and this I mean, I think it mentioned, did it mention bus rapid transit? I thought I read that somewhere.
Yes, so
Okay.
which is really language which is essentially pulled from Go Boston 2030. This is one of the Go Boston 2030 projects. How do we figure out how to have better connections, largely to North Station, but also to downtown from South Boston and South Boston waterfront?
Well, you didn't mention bus rapid transit in your description of trip patterns, et cetera. Is the idea that there will be specific look at dedicated bus lanes too?
Oh, yes, whether it is, yes, that is a clear part of this, is figure out where does it make sense to have dedicated lanes, where is it about signalization, where are the routes right today, and what could better routes be in the future, which is something which the MBTA has also been engaged in.
Okay. Okay, what questions from Councilor O'Malley and Councilor Flynn, then I'll circle back.
Yeah, I think, I don't think gondola should be the approach that we're looking at in this city. I just want to cite that for the record. I know that's not about this, but since it was raised. So this is a $200,000 grant that will fund a study, and it's, just walk me through this. Essentially, it would say, we would hire a consultant who would run a process in place saying, we've got tens of thousands of new residents in the South Boston waterfront, downtown Boston, sort of the North Station area. We need to change our our transportation model. Right. So it could be conceivably an extension of the red line, a new line. It could be
This will be pre-bus, this will be bus focused.
This is specifically on bus,
So
so it'd be creating a new bus line or changing the route of an existing bus line to.
Do the current routes make sense? Are there
Yeah.
improvements we can make to the existing routes? Are there new designs of the routes? Where do dedicated lanes
Yeah.
make sense? All those sort of
Yeah.
pieces. Similar to what, similar to the South Boston piece of this, where
Yeah.
we're taking really a corridor by corridor look.
No, I mean, I get that, we have to be sensitive, so, I mean, it seems like a lot of money, but clearly it's an investment that's a sound one.
Yeah.
Obviously, and I know the chair and I know Councilor Flynn agree, the success of the dedicated bus lanes cannot be overstated and just why they work. I know you feel that way, Chief, and Bill, and I know
Right.
the mayor as well, so grateful for that, so.
We have two users of it in front of us, so.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. So, yeah, no, I think, again, these are exciting projects and glad to be supportive of them. Thank you, Madam Chair.
One small thing to note, which is sort of contextually interesting, I think, is that since we've also launched, and we is really a broad consortium, public-private, the North Station and South Boston Waterfront ferry service, which has also been sort of an interesting companion piece to this, and something which helps inform our thoughts here. Where does it make sense for us to really focus on surface transportation, and what really are those water transportation connections? A lot of that has been, some of that's been charted out by Boston Harbor now, but the initial experience of stakeholders in the South Boston waterfront, I think, has been incredibly positive, looking at reduction in trip time, massive increase in trip reliability, of moving, I think, around 700 people a day by ferry between Lovejoy Wharf at North Station and essentially the ICA Fan Pier and South Boston
Do we contract that out, or does the T do that? The T has one boat, right?
It is contracted out. The MCCA is essentially running the operation.
Yeah.
I think they are contracting with Boston Harbor Cruises. But I could be wrong. Boston Harbor Cruises.
Yeah. I can't overstate, and I know we're all in agreement here, so I'm preaching to the choir, but looking at different modes of transportation is so innovative and smart, and people are willing to pay a little bit extra for a ferry ride if it's going to get them in town, remove that stressors, remove those cars from the roads. It's really a good way to think of things, so I appreciate your focus, and I think that should clearly be driving this conversation, so that's great to hear. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilor O'Malley. Councilor Flynn?
Thank you, Councilor Wu, and I just had a couple follow-up questions. I certainly support dedicated bus lanes, and I certainly support dedicated bicycle lanes as well. So as you study the possibility of including more bus rapid transit, how will you come up with recommendations from people that rely on the bus or that may not rely on the bus, but it would benefit them? What type of outreach would you do to them to get their opinion?
So I think, similar to Councilor Wu's plan, we can come back to sort of what that full stakeholder engagement plan looks like. I think in a really good way, and others here have longer experience with this, but I think our bus riding public is actually more and more engaged, which is a really wonderful thing. It helps get us better feedback about pain points today and improvements tomorrow. And many of your constituents, I know, are queuing up in South Boston, looking to get downtown or looking to get to the Back Bay, and 4, 7, 9, 10, there are bus lines that need improvements. And I think between this plan and the parallel work that's happening, I think we are going to make some near-term improvements, and hopefully this will give us a good plan about longer-term investments as well.
Okay, would the plan include bus rapid transit going from, through the neighborhoods of South Boston, say starting down towards, L Street and Broadway, those intersections, or is it more focused towards the waterfront, or is it all inclusive of South Boston?
This plan is really looking more downtown. The plan that the BPDA is really leading, in some ways, starts around First or around the Reserve Channel and looks sort of towards South Station. That's not to say that as part of the Better Bus overall work, that we aren't looking beyond that, but that's sort of the geographic scope that project's focused on.
Okay. Last night I had the opportunity to visit and speak with the Harborfront Alliance over at the hotel, the Boston Harbor Hotel, with Councilor Edwards, and a lot of the members are made up of the Wharf District Council, Fort Point, the South Boston Waterfront Neighborhood Association, but also a lot of residents from Charlestown and downtown as well. But I know you referenced it earlier, but how is the city or how is the state doing on water transportation going from, say, the Boston Garden area to South Boston waterfront? Do we have enough routes? Do we have enough passengers? Are we making sure that it's an inclusive transportation plan?
Great question. Yep.
And, you know, how can we improve it or get more passengers to participate in waterfront transportation? I do think that public transportation is very challenging, to say the least, and I think, you know, we have a tremendous opportunity with waterfront transportation.
We certainly agree. I think the pilot that is happening now, that just started this year, again, between sort of Lovejoy Wharf and Fan Pier, sort of is something which we can learn from. I think your point around inclusivity, the price point matters for water shuttle, and so as it does for every mode. So I think that's something which we also need to be taking a look at. There's certainly an interest in how that expands, and I think we are in a place where there seems to be very strong alignment between a number of the private property owners, our state authorities like the MCCA, the state, and the city to figure out how do we actually expand water transportation. Boston Harbor now has done sort of a good look at this across the region, which I think gives us a good building block to think about what are the next right routes that we should be most focused on.
My final question, Chief. I had a conversation a couple of weeks ago with the mayor of Salem, Mayor Driscoll,
Yep.
and we were talking about this same exact issue. And she was telling me that a lot of the residents of Salem, that they actually work in the South Boston waterfront, and certainly it can be challenging for them, but she said she would, I think she has a good relationship with you and with Mayor Walsh, but water transportation from the North Shore for Salem or Lynn or some of those places, going from there to the South Boston waterfront. So you're keeping the vehicles off the road, and you're providing a great transportation service. Do you have any thoughts on, just generally speaking, about how we can also make sure it's a regional approach as well?
So in some ways, absolutely. So in some ways, the pilot that is happening now is really with an eye towards North Shore commuters.
Okay.
So I think it's a 20-minute commuter rail ride from Salem to North Station, which is terrific. Then to be able to provide sort of an equivalent and fairly quick connection to the South Boston waterfront is what this shuttle should do. I think it's useful to see, are there other places that a shuttle that starts in Salem, should it have different destinations besides Long Wharf, or I should know exactly where the specific sort of terminal is at this point in time, but should they stop at Fan Pier or another location on the South Boston waterfront? I think that's really useful to look at. I think it's going to become more and more critical for all of us as some of these long-needed major capital investments happen in things like the Tobin and Sumner, these are major capital projects which are going to have a significant impact for folks who commute into our city every single day from the North Shore. So there's more work ahead. I think we've taken a good first step though over the course of this year. Okay,
thank you, Chief. And then my final comment really is, and I know you're concerned about this and dedicated to this as I am, but as we discuss waterfront, water transportation, also we always want to factor in ensuring that everything is ADA compliance, yes. It's open, it's accessible for those in our disability community as well. And I know the mayor shares those concerns, and you do as well. But that's something that's very important to me as well. So, great. And I know we've spoken about that issue for a while also. Thank you, Chief.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Flynn. So just following up on the water transit conversation for a little bit. So I know Boston Harbor now has kind of helped with the business planning piece of it, and MCCA involved. Who is kind of the final arbiter of what routes and when, and who is it the T?
I think it's really a shared piece right now, which there may be others who actually, I don't know that there is sort of like a final arbiter, yeah. But I think that it is in many ways, this is something which is shared because often the services some are run through the T, some are private providers. Sometimes the peer infrastructure may be ours, sometimes it may be a private company. So I think we're each sort of trying to build this out together, which is why I think it's been helpful to have Boston Harbor now and sort of really help us all think collectively about what should we be doing together.
Okay.
I think because it is fragmented, though, it also
Yeah.
means that there's work we need to do to make sure we are actively working together to put this in place.
Especially as the success of the current routes continues to grow demand
Exactly
for more
right.
locations and more stops. I mean, we just came from, I was just in Charlestown, and everyone is clamoring for more and more frequently. And
Yeah, and I think we're learning how to do this, and so I think we have
Okay.
taken a good step over the course of this year. There's more to figure out how we go faster, though.
okay.
Yeah,
And-
and to add to that, Rich McGinnis from the BPDA,
Yep.
he's well on top of this. He's worked
Okay.
on this for years now, so he's very well seasoned in this. So if you had any questions offline, to just ask
Perfect.
him as well.
Rich is great.
I mean,
Yeah, exactly.
you know.
Thank you.
So.
On this grant, how are the private shuttles being taken into account?
So I think we're certainly going to look at what those routes are and what the demand patterns are. The more people we can get into a form of shared transportation, the better. Our priority with each of these projects, though, is the public transportation component. So we start with the MBTA and our coordination. As we've done in the South Boston waterfront, though, to know what those patterns are and know where those shuttles are running is going to be important for us.
Have there been, I've tried to have these conversations, there is general resistance, but I think if you all had these conversations, it would go a lot better, about opening up where there's capacity, some of these private shuttles, especially if they're going to be taking advantage of dedicated bus lanes and infrastructure.
I think that is certainly a conversation we can have about this. It's something which is essentially happening in the ferry pilot, which is the boats themselves are privately funded, but there are spaces for the public. There is a fee associated with it, but there are spaces available. So I think this also leads into potentially that conversation as well. Just how do we get more people, regardless of who's running the vehicle, to be able to be on a shared vehicle getting, again, I agree with you on that.
So I guess my question with that kind of shared mindset then is, as you're planning out the public routes, do you assume then that the shuttles will operate at their current level, or do you assume that they'll eventually get phased out a little bit and the employees will want to be on public transit, or how do you account for that kind of separate
I
market?
mean,
Please.
if I may, with the North Station Action Plan, which we did with the BPDA, we learned a lot of data there. We got a lot of feedback from actual commuters, and you'd be amazed that they always think about time and destination and how quick they can get there. So they're actually on the commuter rail, actually on their phone, actually seeing if a hub bike is there. If it's not available, then the next thing is, can they get a ride share? If they can't get that, then they're on to the shuttle. So it's very quick. So it's all about, as we're looking to do, is some consolidation as well. So we have public-private shuttles, but yet we don't want to get into the private business as well. So we want to, that's a fine line I think we hold, so.
I think we want to make that public option as good as possible. My sense is that we will create sort of trunk lines that will really work for everybody. There are almost always going to be, or probably always going to be, a specific interest in private shuttles that go to specific destinations that are going to be a little bit off those sort of major lines that we're going to most focus on. So I think we'll still see a lot of private shuttle interest.
Right.
But our focus really is how do we make sure that we are creating some really great public routes through downtown.
Okay. Because it'd be interesting to think about if the public system is improved to a certain degree where the private shuttles are less
Needed.
necessary,
Yes.
could the businesses
Absolutely.
contribute in a different way to the
Right.
transportation infrastructure?
Absolutely.
How does this fit in with the Northern Avenue Bridge?
So this and the other study, really more the other study, are looking at sort of what those main crossings are. And would inform what's the use of Northern Ave versus Seaport Boulevard versus Congress versus Summer, the four main sort of crossings. That would be, again, more informed by that second piece, but essentially related. Is there a transit route that really needs to access Northern Ave and needs to access that crossing of Northern Ave, crossing of the 4-point channel on Northern Ave and then taking a right on Atlantic? Or are we routing buses up Seaport Boulevard and going sort of a more through sort of the Post Office Square area as opposed to towards the aquarium?
And this study will have that answer.
Yeah, it's a little bit more the companion study, the BPDA study is looking at that piece, but this study is linked to that because it's more about what
What's the
happens
timeline on the other study?
end of this calendar year.
Same, okay. Okay, and then, so once this study is done and there's some general plan outlined, is there a kind of waiting pot of funding similar to the other grant we talked about to then begin
implementation?
design and, yeah?
So not yet on the downtown side. There is money in some existing corridors. We have funding for things like State Street. We've got some funding for improvements in some other sections of downtown. There's money that we already do have, capital funding, which we put in the budget around Summer Street in the South Boston waterfront side. But this will really help us figure out what are the physical areas we should be most focused on. All that said, we can go faster, as you know, with paint and signal timing. So there may be things which we can do that don't require massive capital construction projects.
Okay. Are there any other pieces related to coming from the Winthrop Square funding that will be with the rest of their cooperation agreement? I mean, is that already done, or are there other pieces still left to fund out of that?
In our world, certainly there's pieces that that are sort of far beyond this. The redesign and reconstruction of Columbia Road is a piece which is funded through the Winthrop Square Garage. There's funding in BTD's budget to be able to start the public outreach conversation around Columbia Road. There's also some funding around improving signals in downtown, and then funding to make essentially permanent or to improve the Tontine Crescent pop-up park, which was created in collaboration with Millennium. There may be other pieces as well that I'm forgetting, but those are the ones that come first to mind.
Okay. And while we're on the subject of them and the project, so is there anything to know kind of from the city's perspective, particularly your cabinet chief, around the news about their recent renaming, at least of the first floor area? Does it affect any of the design pieces or the pedestrian access, or?
Not that I'm aware of, but other folks may know more than I do. So.
I don't know.
Okay. Okay. Anything else that I should know about this grant?
No. There are two things which we are excited to move forward on. As a former South Enders, there's a lot of interest in the first set of projects that Bill has been leading, and the downtown piece is a valuable one for us to go forward with, just because we know that is a big part of our bus network. We need to improve.
Upton Street, was it?
Upton Street?
Upton Street.
Yeah.
No.
One block down. Anyway, I was on West, by two different places, by West Canton and Tremont, and then further on down.
Okay, well, thank you both so much for your time. We will take this up at the next council meeting, which is not next week, but the one after that, assuming that Juan will work his usual magic. So I thank you, and this hearing on dockets number 0174 and 0447 is adjourned.
Great, thank you.
Do you want these?